Welcome everyone to our event on objectives and key results. And first of all, I want to say welcome to our new consulting firm called Decart Consulting, because if you know me from my previous consulting world, then really what I've done over the years is work with leaders about how to help them think differently about how to design and manage work. And welcome, Russell Clark, and thank you for your comment. Now, on the subject of comments, I can't reply to a comment in the comments, but if you have a question or a comment as we go, drop it into the comments under the event, and I'll respond to you verbally during the presentation. So let's get going. So this is about the simplification of OKRs. How do we make OKRs actually improve performance and not make performance worse? Again, if you know me, you'll know that my background is in researching and studying systems. And over the past few years, as OKRs have come to the fore, more and more I've been asked my opinion on what do you think about these OKRs that we're using, and are they making things better? And actually often what they're doing is they're making things worse. And today I want to talk about the three big mistakes to avoid and what to do differently. Now at the end, if you're interested in getting advice or support or joining our OKR workshop, either just drop a comment in the comments that says workshop, please DM me, and someone from the team will get in touch. So first of all, what is an OKR? This is really the only basic slide. Objectives and key results, meaning is about setting an objective and measuring the attainment, or whether that objective has actually been attained. Now, the first thing to think about is typically OKRs are short-term objectives, a few months. And the other big thing is only having a few, 2 or 3. So if you accept that that's what an OKR is, and if you accept that it should be short term, and if you accept that you should have less rather than more, I got an email from someone the other day about the number of initiatives in their organization, and they were saying we're having 130 initiatives going on. Do you think that's too many? Well, I'd say irrespective of the size of the organization, that probably is too many. So the first thing to think about is, are they short term, and is there only a few? But that's not really the big mistake. This is where it actually all goes wrong. So what we did in our research of OKRs is, as well as the study that we're doing all the time when working with organizations, we're studying current performance, current ways of working, helping them think about how to move to a new way of working, whether it's an operations strategy or in projects. We're also always doing some research. And we spoke to 21 consultants or leaders involved in setting or managing OKRs. And here's the first thing they told us. Here's the first big mistake, is that OKRs are generally set arbitrarily and without really any data to determine whether the objective is the right one or the wrong one. In other words, what they mean is generally objectives are set by opinion. For example, we had one leader write to us to say that their organization had spent millions on this initiative, this app, this piece of software, that the leader was absolutely convinced people would turn up and would use. £30 million later, nobody used that particular software. So let me give you how to do this, and let me give you an example on how to get the right objectives. It's not by sitting in a room and saying, what do you think our objectives should be this quarter or this first half of the year? It's about doing these two things, about studying the operation and or studying the marketplace. You know, we get a lot of clients who come to us, or over the years I have had clients come to me talking about cost out type interventions. And therefore they set objectives on how much should we cut our cost. And sometimes some of the big PLCs, we had a big program a few years ago whereby a PLC had told the marketplace how much cost they were going to save. And as such, they actually caused massive dysfunction in the business by setting targets around cost cutting, which made service worse and actually caused them to lose lots and lots of clients. So study the operation or study the market. Now, what do I mean? Let me give you an example of exactly how this works. So here's a call center system. So by studying the operation, what I mean is studying demand from the customer right through to the point that the customer either gets what they want or doesn't get what they want. So this call center takes about 1 million calls per year. And the objective that was set was reduce wait times. No study of the system, no study of the operation, just one data point that says wait times are too long. So without data, what happened is this organization built a new system without understanding how it works today. So the customer calls in and there's an IVR machine, and they can speak to a number of different options for people in the organization. And essentially what happened in that organization was that as they moved through the organization, there was some specialist teams were set up. In other words, the expensive teams were put at the back and the cheap teams were put right at the front. Now, as such, what happened is the majority of people couldn't actually take the calls with the people at the front and pass them back to specialist teams, but they were passed back by using cases. So they would go into a casework type system. The result was that rather than waiting for 30 to 40 minutes to actually handle a customer's call, what ended up was the customer waited for weeks, sometimes months, to get their case responded to. So in other words, the objective and the method by which it was done actually made the system worse because there was a misunderstanding as to how the system works today. So in understanding the current system and setting objectives, the first thing we have to do is study the system. So studying the system allows you to set your objectives. The second thing that we need to do is we need to understand what is the performance of the system today. In other words, let's not just set arbitrary objectives and arbitrary numbers, and I'll come back to that in a second. And third is we need to specify the method by which you actually are going to attempt to achieve your objective. Otherwise, you're just really kind of shooting in the air. So let's get into, as a result of studying the system, the leaders who were very, very good in this organization came up with 3 objectives based on knowledge, not based on arbitrary intent. Number 1, if a case has to be raised, let's reduce the time to close that particular case, because not everything could, in the design of the new system, be handled one stop. Secondly, handle as many calls as possible one stop. And thirdly, the kind of third thing was that if something could not be handled at the first stop, then an appointment would need to be made, and actually, therefore, the objective was increase the number of appointments kept. And coming back to this arbitrary nature of setting objectives, I think often about this quote from Japanese industrialist Matsushita, who said in one of his speeches, "We will win and you will lose, and it's because of how you think." So the first thing to think about is, how are you setting objectives? Are those objectives being set arbitrarily by sitting in a room, coming up with some ideas, or actually are those objectives being set by knowledge and data based on how you work today and how the operation works today, or opportunities in the marketplace? So understanding the current system, being clear on the objective, the current capability, and the method. So let's get to current capability. Here what you see is, you see a kind of an end-to-end graph that says, in this case, to close a case takes up to 22 days. So the question is very, very simple. It takes up to 22 days to close a case, and you know that you've got a 99% confidence level with which to close that case. Where are you going to set your target? Are you going to set it at 10? Are you going to set it at 1? Are you going to set it at 21? And this is the challenge with target setting, is actually what we're doing in most cases with OKRs is setting an arbitrary number around what it actually should be, without any data at all. And we're going to talk about targets in a minute. Second is then what we really want to specify. In other words, we're creating a hypothesis here. What we're saying is, if we understand the old method, is the first team takes a call, passes it to a specialist team, they try to contact the customer. Half the time, actually, they close the case because they can't get a hold of the customer. And then some of the time, what happens is that's passed to a field member, and then they have to go and contact the customer and go and see them again. Then actually, you're in a situation whereby now you understand methodology, you're in a position where you can start to design a new way of working, and you can hypothesize based on the new way of working what actually may happen. But again, it's within the context of what are we achieving today. So here's a comment from Claire. OKRs are generally set in a room, and if there's an appetite and budget, then there will be an understand. So again, that your point is well made, Claire, right? If there's an appetite and if there's a budget, then there may be an understand. Now, even if we look at that understanding, let's say that there is maybe an understand. Is the understand being done by the right people? Is the understand being done by the people who do the work, and therefore they're being guided to understand how it works today and how it should work in the future? Or is the understand being done by external and internal consultants, and they're specifying what the method should be? In other words, they're not the best people to know how to change the work because they don't know most about the work. And I hope you accept that as a premise. So the client came up with, okay, brilliant client, amazing leaders, new method. What should we do? Well, we'll set up one team and an experiment. So the experiment is then the basis for your objectives and your key results. Run experiments. That's what it's all about. Setting up one team that can do everything. They have access to the field officer's diary, and an appointment can then be made there and then. So again, as I say, what we're trying to understand is the objectives are set as many appointments as possible. Let's see how many people keep those appointments. Let's see what happens to wait times. And then let's see what happens to customer satisfaction. So your OKRs are based around experiments, they're based around knowledge, and your measures are based around current capability of the system, and then hypothesizing about, well, if we do this, what do we think is going to happen to our outcomes? In other words, it's not arbitrary objectives and it's not arbitrary target setting, because this is the next problem. If you look at every single text on OKRs, they all say the same thing, and I've read all the books. The text says we should set big targets. We should set big numbers. So again, let's say you have a 20% share in a market. The text says, well, why don't we shoot for 50%? Or let's say it takes 60 days to process a mortgage claim. The text says, well, let's shoot for 30 days. Now, what we've found in much of our interventions over the years is actually, let's say 60 days to process a mortgage. Well, if you know that that mortgage process is full of waste, and you know that the value work, actually to do the value work, only takes 3 to 4 hours, what we find is that actually if it was 60 days was your upper limit, that's your 99% confidence level, well, by changing the methodology and by running experiments, we're finding that we can get that down to a few days, much, much more than the target would ever say, you know, you could have achieved. So this notion of BHAG, you know, big, hairy, audacious goals, actually is a ridiculous notion, because it's not based on current capability. And often what it doesn't force people to do is understand how the system works today, redesign a new system, and then really hypothesize from the methodology what results do we expect the methodology to get us. Russell's saying, understand the data and performance of the market leading results. We can stretch, not break teams. Absolutely. The motivation then comes from collective and shared ownership and understanding of what's required rather than the number we need to reach. Spot on. In other words, the question we must ask is, if we understand the current system, and that has led us to the key objectives, then we can ask the question, by what method do we think about what we can actually achieve from a numbers perspective? Then you can be very, very scientific. If this methodology gets us this result, then let's change it and get a better result. Very, very few people are actually doing that. They're being clear on method, and they're understanding the relationships between specified method and results that they get. In other words, results by objective setting doesn't give you any intelligence about how you got there and where you may need to get to next time. So let's look at the research. There is no research that says target setting is a good thing. Maybe if you're, you know, a runner or sports person or something like that. The only research that says targets are a good thing are in roles where actually there is very, very, very little thinking required at all. Most of the people here are going to be in a situation whereby they are managing knowledge workers, or they are knowledge workers themselves. And the research says on target setting, if we set targets, number one, if the target is set higher than the system is capable, you're going to get dysfunctional behavior. Look at what happened in the NHS when they set targets for A&E. They're in a situation where Really good people keep people in ambulances and in corridors in order to make sure that actually they don't breach the target. And of course, if the target is set too low, then people go to sleep. Motivation is lower the minute you set a target because people are focused on hit the number, and motivation gets even lower when people feel that actually they can't survive in the system. Therefore, what they have to do is hit the number anyway, and thus people cheat to hit the number. So setting big arbitrary numbers often can make performance worse because people either cut corners and cheat, or what they do is go to sleep. And what always happens is motivation goes down. What we want is creativity. We want people engaged in hypothesizing, experimenting, and being clear about method. Thank you, Rachel. Comment from Rachel saying, very pleased to be listening. Great insights already. Appreciate that. Claire's saying, years ago, I worked in a call center. Targets drove colleagues to pick up a call and gang up straight away to hit the target. I remember consulting for a call center, and we're working with frontline teams as we always do. And day one, the team said to us that we always give our new colleague, a bag of crisps. And we say to them, eat the crisps, and then when you get calls that are too difficult to handle, or they're going to go over the target, rustle your crisps so that that's not you, Russell. You know, scrunch up your crisps, and actually that sounds like your line is crackling, and then you have to hang up. So key results are based on, number one, the short-term nature of your experiment. And again, what we're doing is we're differentiating between purpose of the organization and permanent measures. So the permanent measure might be customer satisfaction. It might be reducing the time from the point the customer says, I want one, to the point that they get one. Those are your permanent measures. Whereas your short-term measures based on your objectives are based on your experiments. Number of calls handled once stopped, cases closed incorrectly might be a temporary measure. Number of clients that didn't keep their appointment, and time to close a case. Maybe your temporary measures, but looked at again, if we look at what makes for good measures, most people fail this. When they look at measurement, they're looking at averages. They're looking at variation against the target, as opposed to, are the measures end-to-end that cover the whole customer journey? Can you see variability within the measure? In other words, you understand variation within the system, not just did you hit it or did you not. They're not based on averages, because therefore all you know is an average of the whole system. They give you a confidence level so that you could say, for example, if a customer calls in, the next customer is going to land between this point and this point. Thus, you can start to make predictions that if we change the methodology, we will get a better result. And when you do start to change your methodology based on your experiments, you can actually see trends and whether or not your experiments are making the system better or worse. And I would argue it doesn't matter, because as long as you're clear on methodology and you're clear on what your hypothesis suggests you could and should get, then you can change that methodology. Think about a drug trial. Imagine a drug trial stating the hypothesis is that this drug is going to make people better. And the question that's asked is, well, what ingredients are in the drug? And are the ingredients always the same? And the person designing the drug says, well, I'm not sure on what the ingredients are and whether they're different to the control group. And therefore, the results that we're going to get are based on the ingredients or based on chance. So it's critical that you understand not just the objective, but the ingredients going into what you believe will help you attain that objective. Then if you don't attain the objective, all you need to do is change the ingredients, change the methodology. Comment from Triona. Data and past performance are crucial. Start from where you are now. Absolutely, so that you understand current performance, not set arbitrary measures. Russell again, trends can play a part also on the objectives and can take account of peak times and low points. Absolutely. So where will you set your target? Again, anything between 22 and 0. Well, if you set any target between that point, you're choosing actually just an arbitrary number. What you're better saying is, this is our objective. We want to reduce the time. By using this method, our hypothesis is that we will reduce the time, and we'll measure it, and we'll understand actually what happens, rather than saying we get to 10 when actually you could have got to 2. So again, this notion of permanent and temporary measures. Permanent are measures that are in place all the time. You should still be using the right methods of looking at those measures, but they're related to the purpose of the system. Whereas your temporary measures are related to your key objective and your experiments, but both are based on actual outcomes and capability, not just some grand idea that says, hey, why don't we attempt to do another 20, 30, 40% this year? Working with a client at the moment on their projects, and their intent is to say, in a kind of agile type environment, how do we get more things done per time period? And what we are finding is, by changing the methodology of how they run their projects, we're getting 4 times more through the system than we were in the previous system. I would argue that nobody, irrespective of how ambitious they were, would have said, let's choose a time period, and roughly with the same amount of people, let's get 4 times more than we were doing in the old world. So again, objectives, method, measures. That's your key 3 things to think about. Now, here's one other thing to do. If you look at big change programs and you look at objectives, Claire is saying, important when understanding performance is ensuring that you understand the waste and remove it, questioning what should be the purpose of the system and how we can truly add value to our users and colleagues. Absolutely. And therefore, purpose, picking up on Claire's point, should always be from the customer's point of view. We've done a lot of work over the years in government. And one of the challenges there is that often what we used to see is local authorities specifying their purpose from the government's perspective. You know, look at planning. Do a planning application in 57 days. We studied planning all over Britain because the argument from the planners was inner city is different to rural. What we found in our data, Claire, was that because the measures were the same, give a decision in 57 days, then what we found is the easy cases generally got done in 57 days. We found that the more difficult cases got left, and once they were in the 20%, then they could just lie there forever. In other words, the measure determined the dysfunction in the process, not whether you were rural, inner city, or in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. So there's another way to think about measures. If we accept that, thinking about the drug analogy, we want to make sure that we adhere to a set of ingredients, in order to make sure that if we don't get a result, then we can be clear on what ingredient, what aspect of the methodology to change. Here's the thing that you would measure first of all. First thing to measure is, in our experiments, actually, are we adhering to method? What we find in all our big change programs over the years, in my studies and my research, If we don't get the result that we expect to get, and of course we go and find out, well, what happened? We did this study, we said this is how things are working today, we set a new methodology with the team agreed the methodology, this was the new ways of working, and we hypothesized that, coming back to Claire's point, if we only did the value work, the time would go from this to this, the quality would go from this to this, our cost would fall, our service would improve. And what sometimes happens is the teams start with the new ways of working, and as the data comes through, you look at the data and you go, nothing has changed. Why has nothing changed? We've got a new set of ingredients in our drug, so why is it our drug is not getting a different result? And what we found time and time again was actually, if you think about human behavior and the challenges around changing our routines and changing our habits, is that even though we had the team involved in the analysis, as we always do, and the team, based on a set of principles from us, came up with the new way of working, then often what would happen is the team were so comfortable with the old way of working that actually they would very quickly go back to that. So what we started to put in place for leaders was this, which is process confirmation, a way of sustaining the new ways of working. This is a way for a leader to be extremely helpful to their team. Because if you think about, if somebody doesn't actually follow the way of working that you believe is the right way of working for the customer, for them, and for the organization, then there's only 4 reasons for that. Number 1, they didn't understand what they had to do. Well, whose challenge is that to deal with? Leadership. Number 2, they weren't given the skills to follow the methodology that they were given to do. Whose challenge is that? Leaders. Number 3, and you'll see this a lot with the wrong measures, is actually they were in a situation whereby the system stopped them from doing the new thing. Whose fault is that, or whose challenge is that? Leadership. So before we jump straight to actually we need to fix the people, what we first have to do with process confirmation is understand, if we've agreed with a team a new way of working, and if that new way of working is not happening, how can we as leaders, number 1, be clearer in what needs to be done? Number 2, make sure that we've given them the skills. And number 3, make sure that we've removed all the blockers to them actually working in the new way. Now, if you've done all of that, potentially what's left is the person chose to not work in the new way. You know, for example, if you look at housing benefits over the years, one of the systems we did a lot of work in many, many years ago, well, what you had was this front office, back office split. And the benefits officer sat at the back, and kind of the less experienced staff sat at the front. So the less experienced staff job was to take the information, pass it back to the benefits officer, but actually it wasn't great for the customer. Long wait times, missing information. And if you think about the intervention design, in other words, the new ingredients are all about how do we get expertise nearer to the customer. As a general principle, that's generally the right thing to do. A few benefits officers actually didn't want to do that. They wanted to not be at the front end. In other words, they're saying, I don't want to work in the new way. And this picks up on Claire's point. We need to ensure colleagues understand the why and the value will create, i.e. more customers and improving our business. Now, if you think about the 3 methods of change, well, you've got coercion, which is tell people what they must do, or they get in trouble. Well, that works for a while until people get fed up with that and they just stop doing it. Rational intervention is do a presentation, hope that people enjoy it, hope that people are ready to make the change and they go, I love it. Most organizations choose to do change based on coercion or rational interventions, which is town halls, presentations, communications over the internet, all of that kind of stuff. Actually, what we need to do is spend the time to help people understand the old system, why it's not working, and get them involved in the design of the new system. Coming back to Claire's point, when people understand they naturally care and inherently want to do the right thing. The key, therefore, is how do we best get people to understand? We best get people to understand by involving them in the study, by helping them build the rules of the current system, by getting them involved in building the new rules, and getting them involved in running experiments. Running experiments should be the order of the day. So the key thing as you leave here today is to ask yourself the question in your organization. Number one, are we in a situation whereby we're choosing objectives arbitrarily? Number two, is our method of measuring and setting the numbers around what that objective will be, is that arbitrary? Is that based on setting targets and service standards, SLAs, and budgets, rather than a hypothesis that says, if we do this methodology, then we'll get this result? And number three, are you very clear on the methodology, and do you have a way of actually embedding the methodology within the organization? And the beauty of measuring inputs, measuring adherence to ways of working. I remember many years ago running a change program, and the guy I was working with was a great leader. And what he was doing is he was really diligent on hypothesis, understanding ways of working. Are people adhering to the ways of working? If not, how do I need to help? And he called me this day and he said, Stuart, I know for a fact we're going to get a terrible result next week. And he said, isn't that amazing? Isn't that fantastic? And I said, why is getting a terrible result great news? And he said, because I already know. Because we haven't adhered to our ways of working, I know next week I'm not going to get a good result. Therefore, I already know what to change to improve the result. And if you ask three leaders the key questions, and this, Ali Goldratt came up with this stuff. Three questions. Question number one, what should we change? Question number two, what should we change to? In other words, what is it about our ways of working that if we do this thing versus that thing, we need to change? Third question is, how do we cause the change? Are we doing that change via rational, coercive, or normative designs? His point was, because I know what to change, because I know what I'm predicting in my measures, isn't it amazing that because I'm measuring leading measures, which is my ways of working, I know in advance what my results are going to be, and I already know what I need to change to improve those methods. This is going to sound cliche, but most of the leaders that we've worked with over the years, if you ask them the question, what should you change? They say things like people, more productivity, setting targets. All of those things are wrong because they're not really understanding ways of working. And if you then say, how should you measure the change? Well, we'll set some service standards and SLAs. They fail the test of helping you use a measure that helps you understand and improve performance. And then if you say, how are you going to get people involved in the change? Well, we'll present to them, we'll do town halls. So in other words, from a thinking perspective, this is what our consulting firm does, is it helps people think about change, how to understand the rules that make sure, coming back to Claire's point, that people are engaged fully in that change, they understand the why, and they understand the rules of the game and what their part is in the change. So I want to say thank you for turning up. If you've got any questions or staying for a few minutes, feel free to drop those questions or comments into the chat. I'll stay here for a minute and I'll answer them for you. If there's no questions, that's also fine. Our book, or my book, Fragile, is about the ways of working around why project environments waterfall or agile doesn't work. And it specifies the research that we did that is very, very clear on old ways of working, getting a result where the majority of waterfall projects run late, the majority of change programs fail, why so many agile programs start with X amount of things in at the front end and much, much fewer things coming out of the back end. It explains old way, it explains the new way, it goes into how to study systems and therefore think about objective setting, and it also talks about intervention theory. If you want a copy of the book, go to www.fragilebook.co.uk and you'll get a book copy delivered to you instantly. If you are interested in, we have a free audit to study your system or to study projects. We do a couple of days and we give you some insight into what to change to, how to cause the change. Very focused on projects at the moment. If you want that, Neil's on, he's saying thanks, and he's actually taken advantage of free audit soon. David, great to hear from you. Well, since we've chatted. So get the book. If you want more information, drop me a DM and we'll have a chat. And next month, what we're going to talk about is our client and how we took them from failing in the delivery of their projects to 4 times more output than they had in the previous quarter by changing the ways of working and implementing a project system. So thanks, Russell. Thanks, David. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Triona. Thanks, Rachel. I don't know how many other people were on. I can't see all the names. I know we had a really good turnout today. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want the slides, let me know. Anything we can do, get in touch. All the best.